Oops, I just noticed that when I started recording this, it cut off the top of the tomato there. Okay, so you all can see that I have a tomato. I usually do this with an apple, but it'll work with a tomato because I didn't have a picture of an apple. So here's the technique, and I learned this when I was an art student. Big shout out to Professor Marsha Langham, who later became Marsha Brown, for showing me this. So the idea is this. On the tomato, we're going to pretend there's a tiny little ant right here at the top. And we're going to watch him crawl slowly around the outside of the tomato. And as our eye moves around the outside, our hand is going to, on the piece of paper, do this, on the piece of paper, we're going to only look at the tomato, is going to begin to crawl along with the ant. And what's going to happen is we're going to begin to learn how to coordinate our hand and our eye together so that we're drawing what we actually see and not what we think we see. Because that's the whole reason most people can't draw. They draw what they think they see instead of what they do. Because if I ask most people to draw this, they draw an oval or a circle. And in the reality, the reality of it is that there is no circle. Now, when you first start learning how to do this, whoops, my paper's like shifting, you're going to create something that you're going to think looks bad because you're only looking at the tomato. You're not looking at the paper. You're just following the ant with your eyes and allowing your hand to then follow the ant. And so you're going to come up with something that's like that. And I've been drawing for decades and still it's not quite right. My tomato here actually needed to be a little more, if I look back, if I go back and forth, if I start to move my eye back and forth between the tomato and the paper, I can start to fill this in, whoops, start to fill this in a little bit so I get something a little more, that looks a little bit more like a tomato, the tomato, and then I can erase my original lines. So in the beginning, you want to do this without looking at the paper at all. You just want to allow your hand and your eye to begin to coordinate between the paper and the object you're drawing. And so what you'll do is you'll do this multiple times. Just find something you want to draw, pretend there's an ant on that object crawling around the outside, and blindly with your hand on the paper, draw the outside, the outline. And then later on, you can come back and make adjustments to it, as I did here. And what you have is begins to shape, obviously I would want to create the top, is shaped like a tomato and ends up not being something that you think looks like a tomato, but may not actually be the tomato. Now, what I'm doing now actually, and you see why the drawing is better, is that's the next step. You then start to look back and forth between the object and the paper. And as the ant is crawling along the paper, you still continue to follow, but you go back and forth between your page and the object. And as you can begin to see, my drawing looks more like the tomato. And then ultimately you start getting into shading. And I'm just kind of scribbling here because it's really hard with this camera angle for me to, there we go. Starting to shade. And then you can begin to blend this with your finger. Or some people like to use toilet paper or something. Now, you can see right here is my highlight. So at that point, that is my whitest white right there. I don't want to go in there. But then you just start looking for blocks of highlights. So this is tonal value. And then this is darker. It's very hard to draw on a vertical surface. You guys will do a better job than I do when you draw on a flat surface. And you eventually start getting good at seeing what's there instead of drawing what you think you see. Because when I tell most people, when I normally do this, when I do this in a live class, I tell most people to, you know, draw an apple, and most of them would go. And while it's not a bad apple, if you actually follow the outside of an apple, I've done this so many times I can almost do it from memory. It looks more like this. Or depending on the apple, some of them are kind of round. And that's more of a, whoops. That's more of a shape of a real apple. And that's it. You just, you know, keep going and keep practicing and more, doing it more and more, and eventually get really good at it. So for those of you who think you don't know how to draw or you can't draw, you can learn. It's something anybody can learn how to do. Just lots of practice, and eventually you'll get really good at it. And of course, now it looks like I have an eggplant up here. But if I were to start over and draw this while I'm looking back and forth between the, so I can make adjustments between the tomato and the page, you see it, it's much better. I did the other one completely blind. Okay, that's it. So practice and you'll get really good at it, and then your sketches will look good. Because I attended a session the other day with some other designers and architects, and one of the things they were talking about is how, you know, it's so important to know how to sketch and draw. Because if you're meeting with a client and you're talking about something, and you know, you're able to sit there while you're talking to them and begin to sketch. Actually, this is not lit. And so you can sketch out your ideas and start talking, you know, sketching in front of them as the ideas of what it is that you have, that you're thinking about as you're sketching. And obviously you'll be doing this on a flat surface, so it'll look a whole lot better. It's really impressive to be able to communicate that way. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop here, and I look forward to seeing what you guys do.